Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Coastal Issues Candidate Forum. I'm Kim Ryer. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition Restore Coastal Louisiana, or CRCL. Tonight's forum, featuring 5 candidates for governor, is the latest in our series of candidate forums. We held an event much like this in Thibodaux in 2015 before the last governor's race. In that event, we learned a lot about the views of the candidates on these issues. It was a really valuable event for our community, and we hope that tonight will be the same. I appreciate those of you who are in the audience. I want to let everybody know that this event is also being live streamed on our website, crcl.org, and will be available in recorded fashion on our YouTube channel in the coming days. We are very grateful to the candidates who are here tonight. Joining us are State Senate Majority Leader Sharon Hewitt, Hunter Lundy, State Representative Richard Nelson, Stephen Waguespack, and Dr. Shawn Wilson. Thank you very much for being here. As everyone here and watching this from afar knows, coastal issues are very important to Louisiana voters, regardless of where they live. Our coast is a vibrant, beautiful place. It's the heart of our billion-dollar industries, our seafood industry, our oil and gas industries. It's the heart of our culture, and it's our home. We are so fortunate that we have world-class leaders. Leaders are working to confront land loss and climate change. We have money to do the work, for now at least. But the restoration and protection of our coast will require sustained effort, and most importantly, sustained leadership, which brings us to tonight's forum. We'll be asking these candidates 6 questions on coastal issues. We've provided each campaign the questions in advance. We've formatted the forum to ensure that we don't have the same candidate responding to the first each question. We'll start in reverse order. So for the first question, Dr. Wilson will answer first, followed by Mr. Waguespack, Representative Nelson, Mr. Lundy, Senator Hewitt. For the second question, Mr. Waguespack will respond first, followed by Nelson, Lundy, Hewitt, Wilson, and so on. For most of the questions, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. For our second and third questions, the candidates will have 3 minutes to respond. We have a timer visible to all of the candidates and to me. And with that, I'll begin with the first question. Response time, 2 minutes. Starting with Dr. Wilson. Louisiana is known as sportsman's paradise, and many Louisianians have ties to the coast in one way or another. Dr. Wilson, what does the coast mean to you?
Well, first, let me thank you for having us here. I'm excited to be with you with the rest of the candidates that decided to appear tonight. And to answer your first question, you know, the coast is important not just to folks who reside there, it's important to the entire state of Louisiana. It's where almost half of the population of Louisiana calls home. It's a place that produces over $40 billion in wages and approximately $140 billion to the national GDP. It's a place where any restaurant you go that serves real seafood is going to have seafood that comes from the coast of Louisiana. It's rich in infrastructure, both man-made and natural. When you look at what we have inherited, what we have built, you see why it is so pristine and why it's so valuable to the state of Louisiana, our economy, our way of life, our culture, and our history. I also think it's important because it is the first line of defense for inland Louisiana. It gets the battering ram every time there's a hurricane or a storm. And the value of what the wetlands provide and what the coastal sides of Louisiana provides, I think is oftentimes underappreciated by folks that are inland because they're getting the brunt before it gets anywhere else. And the value of what that has become is much greater than it's ever been. I think it's also increasing because of the built infrastructure that we've seen out there. The billions of dollars that we've invested is going to ensure that the future of the coast in Louisiana is going to continue to be strong, bold, and leading the way. And in terms of leading the way, and I know we're going to talk about this, the opportunities that we can leverage from coastal Louisiana is significant in terms of the new energy market, and do it in a way that we can sustain the pristine land that we have and ensure that we're being smart and sustainable and resilient in what we do. So the coast is a part of who we are, and it will always be a part of who we are, and whoever is governor should understand and prioritize those issues.
Thank you. I guess I'll first start with 2 things. First, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Also, I'll just make one little side comment. Thank you for the book. And I think it's probably funny, the 5 people with the least amount of casual reading time in the whole room get a book to read. But I look forward to powering in through it too real soon.
It's that important.
Yes. But I will tell you this, coastal Louisiana, what does it mean? I don't think there's anywhere else in the country, maybe even the world, where you can look at an area and say it's not just coastal Louisiana, it's a sportsman's paradise, but it's also a working coast, and how Louisiana really is adopted into our way of life. If you talk to someone who lives on the coast, it's not just the place they live, it's literally who they are, how their family, enjoys holidays and each other's companies, how they make their living, how they spend their recreation time. The same people who are hunting and fishing on the weekends and at nights are the same people who are working in the energy fields and the agricultural communities, and they're fishing by day, not just for, in the evening, not just for recreation, but also by day for a job. And I think that's what makes us truly unique and historic in the country. It's the sportsman's paradise and the working coast. So when you see, for instance, policies elsewhere that come down and impact that, it hurts the entire fabric of everything we are. So when the federal government decides it's no longer interested in offshore energy development, it's no longer interested in funding fairly areas like this with royalty revenue so we can provide for our coast, it doesn't just impact a project or an effort, it impacts a quality of life. And I think that's also why, because of the restoration effort going on in Louisiana and why it's always been a group effort that has risen above petty politics, it's because that quality of life core that we all have in coastal Louisiana. The last thing, I would echo something that Shawn said. When you go around the state and talk to people around the state about what is needed, when you bring up coastal Louisiana and the need to restore our coast, the entire state understands it. The entire state feels it. Yes, there's always differences in north and south between the state, but make no mistake, folks in North Louisiana also appreciate what coastal Louisiana brings to the state, and they understand the tremendous importance in getting this solution right, and I think they're just as bought in as well to that, which is a great thing for us to build off on going forward.
Thank you for having me. Give me an excuse to get out of Baton Rouge, so I appreciate that, and I made it through the traffic, so God bless. Apparently he wanted me to be here tonight. For the coast, I think is really something that's important. I think it's really what makes Louisiana unique. I mean, without it, we're really just Arkansas. And I think that's part of our problem, is that we really have to look at something where, at the end of the day, we just need to say this is something that we can all really get behind. I think we had the master plan come up this week where we voted on it in the legislature. And we fight about all these things in the legislature all the time that really I think aren't that critical. And yet we have the master plan come up. It's 5 years or 5 years and $50 billion or something like that. And we all get behind it and we all agree and it comes out unanimously. So I think it's really just kind of one of those key things where we really do all agree on it. And at the same time, when we talk about other states, I honestly in legislation, I always bring up other states and what they're doing, but it's one of these existential problems. I mean, the coast is so much to us. It's really what makes us unique, and yet it's disappearing. It's dying, essentially. I mean, I look at it almost like a relative that is just kind of slowly fading away, and if we don't do anything about it, it's going to be gone. And I think that's kind of the unifying factor in the legislature. Is we look at it, it's just, hey, it's your grandma, your grandpa, you got to do something, or else those things are going to be gone, and we're not going to be able to do anything about it, and we're not going to be able to bring it back. So I really, it really focuses our attention both in the legislature and I think just as a people when we talk about our culture and our livelihoods and everything else and everything everybody loves and believes in Louisiana. Most of it is embodied in the coast, and we have to work to make it better. And so I think it's, for me in the legislature, we have these very tense battles, and we have all these things that go on all the time. And it's just very enlightening, or it's very reassuring to me when something can come up and I can just see the whole board go green because we all agree that this is something we have to save. And I think that the coast is really one of those top priorities that we all have to focus on.
It's easy to say that it's about our culture, because it is about our culture. And it's about the recreation that we've enjoyed. It's about the coastline. It's easy to say that the coastline of Louisiana is the gateway to the economy of Louisiana. It's also the gateway to the economy of North America. Accessing the river, the Mississippi River is so important, and those things around it. Accessing the ship channel in Cameron Parish and the other channels in the state are so important. And so we have so many things about the state that are necessary for the economy about the coastline for the economy, and the consensus is that all the people in Louisiana, whether you're in North Louisiana or South Louisiana, they like this master plan. They like what this organization has been doing for the last number of years, and for the science and the technology and the engineering that have been put into this master plan. But when you really ask me about sportsman's paradise, and I had this discussion a while ago with your chairman, I grew up hunting in Little Chenier. I've raised my sons duck hunting. I've hunted in Calcasieu Parish, Cameron Parish, Vermilion Parish. I've hunted on the north side of the intercoastal, on the south side of the intercoastal. I've hunted in south of Vinton, Louisiana. I've fished in the Gulf. I have fished in the Burns. I have fished in Lacassine Reserve and Sabine Reserve. I have brought wildlife agents from Nebraska down to Louisiana to catch an alligator so they could take it and show it to the children in Nebraska. I can go on and on what I've done connected with the coast of Louisiana. Back when it was legal, I seined speckled trout in Johnson Bayou. So the sportsman's paradise is real to me. It was real to my boys. Now I want to see it to be real to my grandchildren, and we're seeing that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And I'm sorry the other two candidates didn't think that it was important enough for them to be here with you today. You know, my background is oil and gas, and I was an executive for Shell and produced about 10% of the company's production came through my area in the central deepwater Gulf of Mexico. And I have flown over the coast via helicopter more times than I could possibly count. And I have witnessed how the coast is changing and disappearing. But, you know, after getting elected to the legislature, you know, I really developed a whole different way of seeing the sportsman's paradise. I grew up in Lake Charles. My dad and my brother were duck hunters, and I never got invited to go. I never asked to go duck hunting, but I got to clean the ducks, you know, when they brought them home. So I always thought that was kind of fun. But as a legislator, I've been given some opportunities to go duck hunting. And, you know, how cool is it when you're in the blind, it's pitch black, and you hear the wildlife waking up. You hear the different birds. You hear the insects. And the first time I got to do that, I was thinking, wow, why have I waited so long to get to have this experience? It was amazing. And then I got to go deep water fishing, deep sea fishing for the first time. Right? I was on this great big boat, caught an 85-pound amberjack. The thrill of a lifetime. And so, you know, I reflect on those experiences, and I get what we're fighting for. You know, it is the sportsman's paradise, and I've been born and raised, I've lived in Louisiana all my life, but when you have those experiences and you realize all the things, you know, that are available to us, so not only are we a working coast and a great seafood producer for the world, but we have something very, very special here in Louisiana, and it absolutely is worth fighting for.
Move on. Question 2, 3 minutes. CPRA's recent string of record-breaking expenditure years and largest ever projects have been made possible by a robust set of funding streams, including the nearly $8 billion awarded to the state from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill settlement. In 2031, the last oil spill payment will be received, and the coastal program will have only a fraction of the $1 billion per year that it needs. Coastal restoration is expensive, and as we continue to lose the coast, the cost will only rise. To implement the full suite of projects needed to protect and sustain our coast, we need sustainable and reliable funding over time. For Mr. Waguespack, as governor, how would you secure the additional funding we need to fully implement the master plan, and how would you ensure that funds intended for coastal restoration are spent as intended to maximize results and not redirected or rated for other purposes?
You know, coming in here today and visiting with some of the folks in the audience before I came here, I've seen several people who have been in this fight for a long time, many of which I stood shoulder to shoulder with over the years in the early days of some of this fight. And it reminded me of a little history lesson here, that in 2007, when several of us came in that first term of the Jindal administration, you know, the Governor's Office of Coastal Affairs was brand new. And really, it was focused on advocacy and press awareness and just kind of highlighting the need. And one of the first things we did back then is we wanted to turn it into a true land building project management organization. And so the first way to do that, my job was to go beg a guy named Garrett Graves, who was in D.C. at the time, to come down and take the job. Now, anyone who wants to know how easy it is to negotiate with Garrett, just pick up the newspaper over the last couple of weeks and you'll see he's pretty good at it. So it took me a long time to convince him down here, but he came down and helped revolutionize what we've done. It turned into a project management office. At the same time, CPRA was somewhat in its infancy, and there was a question: can this organization rise above politics and be science-driven, data-driven? Those were tested back then. Now it seems common. Yes, we depend on it. Back then it was a test. You have to hold that line on that. And also, over $700 million in surplus were allocated during that time. And so several of the folks I talked to, I'm really proud of those strong decisions in the early days for that. And also, Deepwater Horizon happened during that time when I was there. And several of us worked together, I saw Billy and others work together to secure those dollars, which right now are feeding so many of these projects. Proud of that. But if we're being honest with ourselves, going forward, we have another test around the corner, and we have to be just as strong as ever before, and even more so, to make sure that we have the dependence on science, not politics. We're focused on building land, managing projects, not just advocacy and press, and then we can find new revenue streams to build these projects to keep the line going past 2031, and this is going to be a challenge. Now, the truth is the federal government has never treated Louisiana fair when it comes to giving us our fair share of being the energy working coast of the rest of the country. 37.5% is not 50%. And our federal delegation has fought their tail off to fix this, and I applaud them for it. You need a governor who understands how to work with them side by side, has done it before, to get that done. Also, we know as new technologies come on board, wind, carbon sequestration, tremendous opportunities to attract billions of dollars to Louisiana. How we allocate some of those investments, make sure a big portion goes towards the coast, is critical. We will be tested. There's an opportunity there with the billions of dollars of investment coming in. And so I can't wait to get in this office, build on the previous successes we've had, but be laser focused on securing our federal dollars, working with our delegation to make sure we get more of those dollars we deserve on energy of today, start monetizing the energy tomorrow, which wants to come to Louisiana as long as we invite it and court it like I know we will. And I think we can have just as much success in our windshield as we've had in our rearview mirror if we do that right.
So I think this question is really one of the fundamental ones here. I mean, I think this is where the rubber hits the road, is how do you pay for it? I mean, we have the master plan, it costs $50 billion, but honestly, we're a state where we just don't have the money, and we continue to lose about 40,000 people a year. That's not going to be sustainable. You're not going to be able to pay to save the coast if you have a state that's shrinking and an economy that's not keeping up. And I think so that's why the answer to this question is really fundamental, is that you really have to make Louisiana a successful state. I mean, I say all the time, if Louisiana were just average, we'd live 4 years longer and get a 33% raise. And those are two measurements that I think each individual can see. But you can also measure the success of the state and the state government by what's happening to our coast, and it's disappearing. So I think if we're going to fund the master plan, we're going to have to actually grow the state of Louisiana. We're going to have to make sure that people are not just not leaving, but they're actually moving here, that we're attracting business and industry that's going to come here and actually give us the tax base to fund it. We hear these problems all the time. We need roads, you know, we have crime problems, we have 1,000 different things, and the coast is just one of those things we need to prioritize. But without that tax base, you're not going to be able to pay for it. I've had a whole slew of a tax package that I think brings that industry here, that brings those people here. You look at states like Texas and Florida that also have coastal states. They're very successful. They're attracting people every day. Half of them are from, you know, a ton of them are from Louisiana. They've grown 6 times faster than us in the last census, up to from 2010 to 2020. And we have to look at those systems that are just actually more functional than ours. They're actually bringing people there. They're attracting industries and business. And that's what we have to do if you really want to get the money in the tax base so that you can fund these improvements. We have the plan. I think keeping politics out of it is really important. You know, in the legislature, we fight about projects all the time, and everybody's got their little projects going to their district. I think having the master plan and saying this is how we're going to prioritize this money, I think that's the way to go. Keep the politics out of the system and just let the master plan do its work. But funding it is really going to be the fundamental problem, especially when this money runs out. Louisiana, we've really lived, we live disaster to disaster. I mean, that's how it works. You know, we need a hurricane, we need a BP oil spill or something in order to keep the checks coming, and that's not a sustainable way to do it. We can't rely on the federal government. Like, look how much debt the federal government has, $31 trillion. Like, the interest on that is going to be crushing. We can't look to them to save us. We really have to reinvent ourselves so that we can save ourselves. And I think if we don't do that, you're going to see the coast is going to be one of the victims here. And so I think it's a much broader answer to this question, is you need to really have a successful state that's attracting people, that's growing an economy, because without that, we're not going to be able to fund these things. And it's, like I said before, it's really what makes us unique. It's our heart and soul, and I think it's got to be one of the priorities that we look at funding. As soon as you expand the tax base, a lot of these problems go away. The good thing is having the master plan makes this a money problem, because we already know what's the scientifically decided way to fix this. I wish we had that for every one of our problems. We don't. But for the coast, we really have it. We've already decided this is how you fix it, and now we just have to pay for it. And we can do that if we change our state, we fix our taxes, and we make it more competitive.
From April 20th of 2010 forward until the $8 billion was provided to this organization to do the coastal restoration, I was on the team working towards getting the $8 billion. At the same time, I was on the team trying to help residents of Louisiana who had lost their livelihood, fishermen, oarshmen, and so forth that had lost their livelihood temporarily because of the damage caused by that spill, because of the inept acts of an oil company who did not take the measures that were safe or sound to run it. So the question here is about how are we going to deal with the money. You know, had Governor Jindal enforced the law, or had his people, the one good thing that did come out of him is having a czar named Garrett Graves on it. That's the only thing that I know that came out of that administration that's effective here. He didn't enforce the law. And today we can enforce the law, but you won't hear it from this panel because they're all special interests. I'm a conservative independent. I'm not married to any political party. And so I know for a fact the law in Louisiana, we have a coastal zone program that allows parishes in the state to intervene, which they've done now. The Attorney General, of course, is using it for political gain right now. Of course, he's not here. But to recover for the acts of oil companies or whoever got a permit to put a canal or a pipeline through because they didn't fix them, the law requires that you restore it. So we have thousands of canals wide open that have allowed for the saltwater intrusion into our marshes. That's destroying our coastal line. Your own master plan says it. So why aren't we for it? Well, they're forcing it now. There's suits filed all over the state of Louisiana. The Attorney General has intervened for the state. And if you read the law, and had Jindal followed the law, he would have enforced compliance a long time ago. But he didn't. Well, today the actions are taken, and it's not just a BP problem. Now, BP put up the $8 billion, and they're not, they don't have a release from their liability. They still may owe more money. But I can tell you, Mobil and Chevron and Shell all across the marshland, the wetlands, the coastal of Louisiana, there's billions of dollars of damage to us. We need to get them to comply with the law and fix it. Let the courts decide who owes what. They owe it. Yes, the natural causes or problems of the coastline. Yes, we have problems with the hurricanes and the storms. But I will work with any congressman, any senator. We have the RISE Act that we want to see go through. We want to see the Go Mesa formula change so we can get more money with it. We want to see these coastal management actions go forward, because 75% of that money goes to the state and 25% goes to the individual parishes to be used for coastal restoration. So we just have to do what the law says do. Thank you.
Well, the fact of the matter is the majority of the funding that goes to the coast, restoring and protecting the coast, actually does come from the oil and gas industry. Most of it through the Go Mesa dollars, some of it through the BP dollars, and there are many other funds. But you need a viable oil and gas industry if you want to rebuild the coast. So you don't need an administration that's basically declaring war on the oil and gas industry, or an attorney general that is suing the oil and gas industry without any proof, right, that the things that they violated their coastal zone permits. So, I have said, let's pause those coastal lawsuits. They're suing 200 oil and gas companies. Pause the coastal lawsuits, determine who actually violated the permits and hold them accountable. But the idea that you're just going to sue everybody carte blanche is running the industry out of the state of Louisiana. And that is not a good thing when we're talking about funding for coastal restoration. Now, there is work being done in Congress that's very, very important in not only increasing the percentage of Go Mesa money that would come back to the state, as is done in all the other states, from 37.5% to 50%, but to also include other forms of energy that we are also developing in Louisiana, such as wind and others, so that there will be some benefit coming back to the states that are investing in those sources of energy. So I think that's all very, very important. I also want to make a comment about, how can we guarantee, part of your question is that the money's not redirected or rated for other purposes. Okay, we know that was a problem in the Jindal Waguespack years where monies were swept from dedicated funds and used for other things. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. That has not happened in these last 8 years. And I can tell you, I have led an effort for the last 5 years or so in examining all of our dedicated funds to make sure that they were being used for the intended purpose, and they are, and then to challenge whether or not we really need to keep all of them and to unravel as many of them as we could so that all of those projects had to compete on a level playing field for funding instead of having stuff squirreled away that maybe was a priority back in the day and is no longer a priority. And we have undedicated over $100 million of funds so far. I also think that we need to make sure that the money we're investing is sustainable. You asked about, how do we make sure that we're maximizing the results? One of the things that I have supported is looking at the faulting of the state, where the faults exist, because it doesn't, and there's a great synergy between where we're seeing our biggest land loss and where the down thrown side of the faults are. And we need to make sure we're putting dirt and sediment in all the right places.
So this is a great question because it really speaks to what the future of Louisiana looks like, and you can't ignore the history. My history with this issue goes back to 2005 when we had Katrina, and we realized that we needed a more comprehensive and consistent approach to this, and was a part of the early discussions when we consolidated the offices or people from the offices of the Department of Transportation and Development, the inheritor of the old public works system, as well as the Department of Natural Resources. And I was a part of that discussion when we shared resources for the first time, and we were collaborative, and we were concerned about what was the science going to tell us to do and how are we going to sustain that. But you got a 3-point question here. How do you secure additional funding? First and foremost, you have to hold the federal government accountable to expect and get the royalties that we deserve. You heard a candidate up here mention the RISE Act and the importance of Go Mesa and increasing that share. Those are things that any governor worth their weight in salt would support. But how do you go about doing that? How do you work with an administration over the history of this? And I'm a candidate who's worked with Republican and Democratic administrations and been successful in that effort. I'm also a candidate that will tell you how important it is to have a presence in Washington, D.C. on a full-time basis to help advocate for these issues and to help agencies and organizations and associations like this when they go to Washington, D.C. to maximize those benefits. I also will tell you the second part of your question is how do you ensure funds intended for coastal restoration are spent as they're intended? You're looking at the secretary who helped clean up the diversions of what was called the Transportation Trust Fund, that we had violated all of the trust. And on day one, Governor Edwards supported my commitment and my recommendation to prevent all of those diversions. Establishing a trusted relationship with revenue absolutely makes sense for coastal investment. The reality is we know when the funds are going to run out. So let's not wait until 2030 to say, hey, we got a problem. We've got to start doing something to stop this. You need to start investing today. What does that look like? Well, you have an opportunity to look at pilots, payment in lieu of taxes for individuals in the coastal area to support investment to begin to populate what I would consider a coastal investment bank, an infrastructure bank dedicated to sustaining coastal projects, because we know what we need to do. We've priced them out. We know what the cost of inflation will be. We've got to put together a plan and start saving now. Looking at one-time funding. I'm a supporter of spending the one-time investments that we have an opportunity to, according to the Constitution, using capital outlay funds, using other measures that we get, and then taking advantage of all of the federal bills that we see. When you look at all of the opportunities and new energy and the new leases that are out there, we have to start dedicating the dollars and have discipline. If we think it's important, and I think we do, if we think it's important, we've got to be committed, we've got to be transparent, and we've got to hold ourselves accountable. We've established that with the Coastal Master Plan. We need to find the resources. That's the hard part of the conversation that no one wants to talk about. Those are some ideas on how to advance this project and the efforts to fund these projects sustainably.
Thank you. We've talked about the importance of the coast. We've talked about funding. We'll move on to large projects, river diversions, and fisheries. So question 3 minutes. Our next governor will preside over a period of ambitious implementation, a period in which we'll move into tougher challenges, from straightforward, simpler projects to some large, complicated, phased projects like the Mid-Barataria and Mid-Breton sediment diversions. These projects have the support of an overwhelming majority of Louisiana residents and scientists. However, there's no doubt large-scale sediment diversions will have impacts on the state's commercial fishing industry. $368 million have been specifically allocated to mitigate those impacts. As governor, starting with Representative Nelson, how would you ensure that projects like the Mid-Barataria and Mid-Breton sediment diversions are implemented without delay? And how would you ensure the mitigation dollars are spent in a way that actually helps those communities and individuals that are negatively affected by the large-scale diversions?
Sure, thank you. So, one of the most interesting things to me is there's an article in I think National Geographic from like 1897 or something like that, and it said, look, when we levee the river, it's going to cause, the next few generations will have benefit, but then we're going to be paying for it in the future. So hopefully, by the time we start seeing Louisiana sink into the Gulf of Mexico, we'll be able to have the money to fix it. And so this is, I think, one of those things that guy was talking about in 1897, that now it's time for us to fix it. And that's these sediment diversions that are really going to harness that power of the river that actually built, especially southeast Louisiana, and using that to actually rebuild it. The problem is it's going to cost a lot of money, and obviously it's going to disrupt the system that's developed over the last 100 years since we built the levees and seen those areas really sink into the Gulf of Mexico. And I think that it's one of those things that the governor really has to be committed to. I think that it's using the processes that will continuously build land, and I think that's why it's so important. It's not just building, rebuilding an island or building something that's swept away, but really using that section or the power of the river to continuously rebuild land, and that's why it's so critical. I think there's an executive order that says, hey, everybody get on board with this, everybody get on board with this master plan so that all the agencies in the state government are aligned to make sure that this gets done. I would continue to push on our federal partners, the Army Corps of Engineers. I know Garrett Graves is super tuned into the Army Corps of Engineers to get them to move the permits forward, to get everything going. Because really it's, time is, she's a wasting. Every day that we're talking about it, all of the sediment in the Mississippi River is falling off the continental shelf in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not rebuilding Louisiana. As far as the impacts it's going to have on the fisheries, I think those are obviously very real as well. There's people that have built their livelihoods in the oyster beds and the catching shrimp, catching fish, all in those areas, and I think that those are things we have to be very careful of. That's what the money is set aside for, and I think we just have to be careful that it goes to the people who really need it and really deserve it, and it goes to offset the harm that gets caused. I know there's a bunch of different elements that we can do, making sure that the oyster beds are moved, that we give them some kind of compensation for the oyster farmers that are moving further out and now going to have to transport their loads back farther with extra refrigeration and things like that. The shrimpers, I think, have the same concern. They need to be able to catch make their catches and transfer it back. and they're going to have to go further out. So it may need some upgrades to their boats and things like that, and I think that that's really important. One of the other thing is I think our fisheries, our charter fishermen, and one of the things we love about a sportsman paradise, we see speckled trout, redfish, those kind of populations are falling off. So I think that the impacts of those are really important. We have to look at ways that we can help make sure that those fisheries are sustainable and use that money to protect those things, because those are really a critical part of Louisiana. I think something that even if you don't live on the coast, everybody goes down to coastal Louisiana and goes fishing. So I think that we need to protect those fin fish species as well, and using that money to offset those harms is very critical.
I'll be the governor who's transparent. Right now, there is no contract or anything shown on our amounts or payments shown on the website, but I'm going to make sure that there's a public website that can be followed daily in real time so that we can track every dollar that comes through this organization and that goes for this project. And so we've got to be accountable. You know, I've always said, that Micah 6:8 was my theme scripture about do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord. And so I'm a justice guy. And so we have to be transparent. So contracts have to be disclosed to the public. Audits have to be done. As the governor, I'll make the Attorney General and Division of Administrator accountable. I will work side by side with the legislature to make sure that these projects that are mentioned in this question are taken care of and they're done right. The money goes where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go in a timely fashion. I know that govern means just that. We collaborate, we talk, we get together. And this organization is an incredible organization. I know that your recent leader just resigned, and the two guys that will succeed in succession are great guys. I've heard nothing but good things about how this project has been run and the people that you have. Because I just recently read the master plan when it was given to me. Again, I've been an advocate for 40 years, and I've advocated for thousands of people for similar instances like this, and it's all about fairness. So as a governor, we're going to be fair to everybody. You govern to try to produce the thing that's best for the most people in the state. But accountability, we're going to have accountability. There's not going to be any sneaking around. There's not going to be any brother-in-law deals, and it's going to be disclosed. The public has a right to know. So with technology the way it is today, we can do just that. So this kind of question is just kind of it assumes that we're not going to act in good faith, and I can promise you I'll act in good faith. As to the $378 million, I know that the BP settlement was for $2.3 billion for the fishermen, for the shrimp and so forth, but I know there were other states included, not just Louisiana. But I mean, when the fresh water had to be diverted out of the Mississippi River to stop the oil flow from just totally crushing the coast of Louisiana and these other coastlines, that's what killed the fish. Now we're going to divert fresh water again to try to rebuild the marshes, which is the right thing to do. I'm not sure if the 378 is enough, but I trust this organization. I trust these people who've done the work. It may be enough, but that's something we'll look at. And so if it has to be changed, it'll be changed. Because our fishing industry in Louisiana, we supply the seafood to 25% of North America right out of Louisiana. It's extremely important. Thank you.
Well, I've been very involved in these diversions. My district goes from basically the Mississippi River to the Mississippi state line. And so, Mid-Breton is in my district, my Senate district. Mid-Barataria is right across the river. And I've been involved in lots and lots of public hearings to hear from the fishermen and the people in the community about their concerns about these projects. As an engineer, I love the way the whole projects are designed because it's intended, as you all know, to model the Mississippi River before we had the levees. And it's constructed so that we can change how much water is diverted and sediment into the marsh to build land as the river changes and as the sediment load changes and the rates change and the salinity changes and the impact on the ecosystem is constantly being evaluated. And so I will make sure as governor that we are doing exactly that. And that has been my promise to the fishermen, is that we are going to make sure that we really are being data-driven and that we are going to change the diversion program as we get information and data so that we try to mitigate the negative impacts as much as possible. So that's kind of the first thing. We talked about the $378 million. That number, of course, was increased recently, not that long ago, because of feedback from the community about the concerns. So that number was increased to try to make sure that we do as much as we can to mitigate the negative impact of these projects. So, you know, one thing, of course, we've talked about the impact on the oystermen. They're so passionate, and I have many oystermen in my district, and they wear me out because, of course, they are going to be, their beds are going to be disrupted. Did you know the coastline, oh, by the way, over millions of years, has moved up to Tennessee and back multiple times? So the oysters have learned how to move and to change, and I'm sure they will again, but they need help, you know, planting new beds, culture for new beds. The shrimpers and the fishermen are gonna need, you know, larger boats and refrigeration and things like that because they probably will have to work a little further out. And then there are communities that are going to be more flood prone as a result of the work that we're doing with these diversions. And so there's money in that for buyouts and elevations, home elevations and things like that. And so, you know, I think that CPRA, to give them a shout out, I think they have been very responsive to the needs of the community, but they can't be shallow promises. We have to make sure, and I will as governor, make sure that we absolutely follow through on those promises and that we continue to be flexible and adaptable as we get more information so that we continue to do everything we can to mitigate the negative impacts of these projects and maximize the value of the work that we're trying to accomplish.
So this is an example of what bold leadership looks like when you try to transform the face of the earth and the world that we know and we love, and it's called the coast. As governor, I would remain committed to the expeditious delivery of what this is. As business people, we understand that time is money, and the longer we take, the more expensive it's going to be, the more impactful the mitigation will have to be, and the more costly it will have to be. As Secretary of the Department of Transportation, we introduced a whole world of innovation of project delivery, and I think there's always evolutions in that, from the traditional design bid build to design build, accelerated design build, construction manager at risk, a whole bunch of things that we can do to accelerate the delivery of these very important projects. Likewise, we've got to juggle several different elements at the same time, and so working on the permitting process for what's next in line, I think absolutely makes sense to take advantage of the ways we are attempting to streamline the permitting and the environmental process so that we can deliver these projects sooner rather than later. I will tell you, in my experience, when you talk about mitigation and you talk about these types of projects, you have to be genuine in engaging stakeholders. You have to spend time. One of the hallmarks of my tenure as secretary was being the first one at a public meeting and oftentimes the last one to leave. That's how you ensure transparency and accountability, when you give them a person that you can hold accountable. It's going to start with who the director of CPRA is. It's going to start with who are the coalitions that they're going to build and how consistent we'll be in having those relationships. It's also important to work across agencies in a way that will engage stakeholders from different perspectives. So when you look at what the Lieutenant Governor's Office does with the commercial fishermen industry for our cultural tourism components, we have to understand that relationship and leverage it to the best of our ability, not just for those agencies, but for the citizens, for those fishermen, to ensure that there's some certainty in their way of life. Remaining committed to the plan is the most important thing that we can do. The state of Louisiana is dotted with projects that we talked about 30 years ago and have never built them. They're dotted with projects that we said we needed and we still need today, but we haven't taken the steps to deliver them. I've done that as Secretary of Transportation. What a hallmark of this administration for the last 7 years was we didn't create new projects, not unless it was an imperative from something like on the coastal side. We actually found the projects that we talked about for the last 30 years and built them, and it's a lot cheaper for you to do it sooner than later than waiting much later to build something. The cost of construction and inflation will eat your lunch, and you have no resources to be able to close that gap. Working with local governments is also important. And as governor, I'm going to respect their authority. I'm going to respect their desires of their constituents, because all politics are local. and in the process of working with local governments, engaging citizens on an ongoing basis as it relates to mitigation, to understand the impact, to understand the value, and understand the modifications that will have to be made are going to be essential to assure that there's value at the end of the day, not just for the projects, but for the mitigation and the intended purposes that we're providing.
You know, over the years, the legislature has tackled 1,000 different reports and studies to fix 1,000 different issues and all that stuff, all in good faith, all in good effort. So what makes this one different? What is different on this master plan as compared to all the other things that have been tried over the years? And I think what makes this one unique is where the intersection of a data-driven process, which gives it credibility, but don't forget the procedure. The fact that CPRA and the coalition does these regional visits and hearings and testimonials and gets public input, there is a buy-in. Someone typed these words on a piece of paper, but there are 1,000 different hands that go into not just the crafting of this, but also the implementation of this. So by the time it gets to a tough decision, like a diversion, it's not in a vacuum. It didn't come out of some committee in dark of night and get dumped on people, and people say, where'd this come from? That's the beauty of it, and that's what's been so great about it. That beauty will be tested more than ever before when you get to some of these diversions, because this is tough stuff. This impacts people at their kitchen table level. I think this process is ready for that type of challenge. It takes not just the data-driven policy, but going down and listening to people where they are, hearing their concerns. And if accommodations need to be made or tweaked, it comes through the data-driven process that the science can support. I think this is the process and the policy. That's what separates this plan from everything else. The other thing is, when you think about what a governor's role is in this, it's not to put the heavy thumb of the fourth floor on this. It's not to kind of play politics with this. It's just to be that bedrock to say, look, follow the process, follow the science. If you do that right, I have your back. That's what this process needs from the next governor, and that's what they're going to get from me as governor. I would say when you're part of that listening, and you talk about the impact, Sharon mentioned it earlier, oystermen will be impacted, so will shrimpers, so will fishermen. The question talked about the commercial fishery industry. Don't forget the recreational fisher industry. Those people get impacted also. Accommodations have to be made so that quality of life, that culture we talked about in the first question, is protected. We're not just building land, we're also retaining a culture in all this, and the process is important in doing that right. Quite frankly, you have imports coming in right now threatening our industries, in the fisheries and the shrimp industries. If we boldly use this coalition to go out and tackle that, stop that, give them that confidence, maybe it's easier for that fishery industry to be more accommodating on some of these diversions and be more of a partner if they think that we're a partner on an issue that impacts them. The same thing on the recreational fishery side. You have so many recreational fishermen in this state begging for a better balance with some of the Menhaden industry. Maybe it's time to work with them to give them that better balance so we can still keep those jobs here, but also give what the recreational fishermen are asking for, a little bit more buffer. Don't threaten those redfish, because we do that on weekends just like the others do it during the weekday for work. We got to have the balance of quality of life and economic development. This process is battle tested. As governor, I will back this process up when it gets put to the test more than ever before.
Thank you. Moving on to insurance. While the state, the Army Corps, and local levee districts are working to restore and protect the coast as quickly as possible, economic implications from the coastal crisis can move even faster. We are seeing this in the homeowners insurance market and in the way that the National Flood Insurance Program is pricing risk under Rating 2.0. And there are indications that bond ratings agencies are tracking this type of risk ever more closely every year. These economic conditions are threatening the sustainability of coastal communities, whether they have been damaged by recent hurricanes or floods or not. As governor, how would you bring the power of your office to address the cost and availability of insurance and other challenges that are intimately connected to coastal resilience? Mr. Lundy.
All right. 1 out of 5 people in Louisiana have made a homeowner's claim, have made a flood claim, or have made a property claim. In the last 3 years, it's been very difficult with Laura, Delta, Ida, and you can just go on and on. I saw after Katrina and Rita having the opportunity to represent a lot of people, both in Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Louisiana, to see the changes in the insurance market and what they did. And it was difficult, but it was more fair than it is today. And I don't know if it's greed is the motivation or what is the motivation, but it's a problem. So what we can do, and what I would do as the governor if the legislature agreed, Louisiana citizens has had to step in, and I know they're gouging people. We'd have to control the amount of the coverage and make it 10% above market value, or suggest it, have an actuary involved. That's one way to solve the problem. Maybe get into the reinsurance business so we can have insurance in the state of Louisiana, because 55% of the people in Louisiana are having problems with insurance right now. I talked to someone this morning who paid $600 last year for his flood premium, and it's now $6,000. So when the 2.0 formula came into play initially, I thought it might be good, because we did put barriers up in Lafourche and Terrebonne and in southwest Louisiana. The barrier in Cameron Parish preserved Highway 82. We were losing it after Hurricane Rita, but it's there today because of the actions that were taken, a lot driven by this organization. We need to do, I wish our congressman, I wish our government, our attorney general had not used, now it's an opportunity to file suit against FEMA because of the 2.0 formula. But it should have been done way ahead of time. They should have looked at this sooner, because that's a problem. Flood insurance is a problem, and we've got to tackle it as a group. I know I'm out of time.
Well, thank you for the question. We really understand what the flooding issue is in my Senate district. Again, I have from the Mississippi River to the Mississippi state line, and when Chip would put up on the slide the 50-year plan with no action, he would show on this color-coded map my entire Senate district's underwater. So, and every time he would do that, I would call and say, oh my gosh, the for sale signs are going up lickety-split every time you do that. And we are very concerned about flooding in my area. And, it doesn't, and that's not with hurricanes. So never mind when you have a hurricane. So it is a very big problem. One of the things, of course, that you can do to help that is by building more flood protection. We are fighting right now with the Corps of Engineers. We have a 3x3, 3-year, $3 million study. We're almost through with it, to build a levee protection system in eastern St. Tammany. We're the only part of Lake Pontchartrain that isn't really protected with a levee system. And we know that that's very, very, very important. We also are doing a lot of work in the legislature right now on insurance. Well, let me talk first about flood insurance. Flood insurance, as you know, is a federal issue, and we have been working with our congressional delegation to understand 2.0, because the formula is not well understood, and people deserve to know, and there needs to be more transparency. But it also affects your property insurance, and we are doing a lot of work in the legislature this session to address property insurance, because between property and flood, my people can't afford it. And they are moving out because it's a double whammy and they can't afford it. You're going to see, I think, some significant insurance reforms in this legislative session that will make it better for insurance companies to want to work in Louisiana. I also have passed, it's on the governor's desk, a fortified roof program that will lower your insurance premiums if you have a fortified roof, and I think that's going to be a game changer.
So, Risk Rating 2.0 is increasing flood insurance on citizens all across the state of Louisiana, and it's unacceptable, and it's unfair, particularly for folks in the coastal area, in many cases, individuals who are still trying to get the new roof on their home as a result of what they've been fighting with insurance companies. I think it's important to note that as governor, you're going to have someone in me who will work with the National Governors Association and other states that are actually dealing with the same problem in the coastal area, looking not just at the Southeast, but also looking at California, looking at Florida on their end to see, because they are large players in this insurance market and this insurance crisis, as well as in the reinsurance market that can collapse for the entire country. This problem is going to be bigger than just the state of Louisiana. It's going to require a concerted effort through the National Governors Association. I'm encouraged by some of the things that we see coming out the legislature, whether it's the insurance fund to attract new entrants to this market, or if it's the fortified roof program and the commitment or the value or the idea that we're going to get lower rates. I would hope that we would remain committed and not just change what we've already changed or make differences or make nuanced differences to things that we've already passed before we give it an opportunity to work. As governor, you'll have someone in me who will work personally and directly engage with the insurance market to bring them here, let them experience the hurt and the pain and the loss that we're experiencing as a result of their policies and their decisions. Advocating for dollars at the federal level is essential. That's going to be an important thing, but it's not always more essential than the policy relief that you can get from the federal government. Working with our congressional delegation, that is not always on the same page, by the way, like anyone in Congress. They're all over the map on occasions, but working with our congressional delegation, working with other coalitions is the way to fix this problem. I've seen it happen on dredging the Mississippi River. If it weren't for the other governors up and down the Mississippi River that signed a letter that I drafted for the governor to support the investment to dredge the Mississippi River to 50 feet, it wouldn't have happened. That same type of coalition building is what we need on this issue, and as a bridge builder, someone who can do those coalitions will make that happen in my administration.
You know, the frustration you feel from, I think, some of us, and you have it as citizens of this state, is this is a huge crisis for this state's viability, and it's largely dependent on a federal government decision. How does that make you feel safe? It doesn't. FEMA gets in, you know, we talked about the beauty of the CPRA data-driven collaborative process. That's the opposite of what the flood insurance program is. You have some bureaucrats that went into a dark room and came out and said, here's the impact, here's what it's going to cost, and you've got a federal delegation begging for the data, you've got hearings being held begging for the data, you got GNO Inc. and Michael Hecht and others putting together coalitions begging for the data, you got a lawsuit against the federal government begging for the data. That's the opposite of what CPRA and this coastal-driven plan has done. That's what's so frustrating about it. But we have to play that game. So yes, I do think we have to work together to make sure the federal government sees what we see, that this coastal area is critical to the country's economic viability. If coastal Louisiana dies, it's not just Louisiana that suffers. It is the energy we produce, the fisheries we produce, the culture we bring to this country. We are the last saving grace of providing energy to this company. If you haven't noticed, the feds have shut down most of the other states' energy production. We're carrying everyone on our back. You can't do what they're doing to us on flood insurance if you want us to carry you on your back anymore. So the American economy depends on us, and I think we can get that done if we make that voice heard. The last thing I would say is fortification of communities. That is important not just for the private insurance market, but also for us to go have a credible argument to go and fix this 2.0. Yes, that is a roofing program. Yes, that is doing the data analysis to really be able to show in hard proof all of this coastal effort we're doing. It's not just to save our coast, it's to fortify communities, to make it a much more viable place for you to insure when we have an issue. I think if we can put a data-driven approach to that and go make our argument aggressively, remind the federal government that you need us not just because we're nice to hang around, but we are providing the energy that you need, because if you haven't noticed, other states aren't doing it. Maybe that's our best case to get that closed room of bureaucrats to see the reality that we all say on a daily basis.
So I think there's two issues that are here, right? One's federal and one's state. It's funny because people call me, this is probably the number one issue I get in Mandeville, is they call me about their insurance and they say, listen, something's wrong. I can't get a policy, or my policy went up 100% or 50%. I think mine personally went up 50%. This is the number one issue I get called about. And so I have to detail, hey, look, this is what we're doing in the legislature this year. We're trying to address at least the homeowners insurance problem we can address on a state level. To some extent, it's actuarially set, right? The insurance companies look at us and they say, listen, you got 4 hurricanes or whatever in the last 2 years, and it's really expensive. That's the risk. But in reality, if you look across the border in Mississippi, the insurance premiums are much less. And so we have that same problem. I have people tell me, I live in Mandeville, it's not too far from Mississippi. They tell me, hey, look, I'm moving to Mississippi because I can't afford the insurance in Louisiana anymore. Well, that shows you Mississippi's coast is not that different from Louisiana's coast, especially from Mandeville. So there's actually legal differences that are the reason for some of the differences in our insurance costs. And we're addressing some of those in the legislature, at least we're working and attempting to. I think that you got to continue to look at things where we're an outlier, rules that we have, that I think everybody hates their insurance company, so you really have to balance that. you know, how much do we hate the insurance company and how much do we all have to have insurance? And you have to come up with a better balance of that, because I think right now we're not in a situation where we can drive more insurance companies out. I think we have to look at those rules. We're doing that currently in the legislature. I think we're going to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of some of those changes, and honestly, they're going to need more work, and that's going to be the only way that you're going to make insurance affordable, especially in South Louisiana. And even my friends in North Louisiana, they're impacted by it, because some of our rules say if you don't want to do business in South Louisiana, you're not going to do business in North Louisiana either. So now, even in Shreveport, they can't get insurance coverage. So it's kind of a thing we're all in together. And I think on the federal flood insurance program, like, we have to continue to put pressure on our delegation, and luckily we have a lot of people really high in leadership in Congress that I think will be able to get some movement in there to get more transparency in the program and get more relief for South Louisiana.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. We're headed for the Southwest and then climate change and energy transition. Focus on the Southwest. While our coastline stretches from Texas to Mississippi, most of the discussions that we have about coastal restoration and protection are focused on locations east of the Atchafalaya River. The people of Southwest Louisiana are facing challenges of their own, such as water quality and drainage as it relates to maintenance dredging of the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, subsidence, and recovery from devastating hurricanes. In your opinion, what is the largest single challenge facing the southwest coast of our state?
All right, I think that question starts with me. Well, yes, we do need to protect all of our coast. With a $1.6 billion program this year, the lion's share of it is going to the southeastern part of the state. That just so happens to be where the biggest need is. And when you look at the diversions, of course, they're $1 billion plus, and so that kind of skews the numbers quite a bit. But look, I grew up in Lake Charles. I am familiar with the Intercoastal Waterway and Prion Lake and the importance of that. And so those issues are very important to the state as well, and will be important to me as governor. The issue, as I understand it, that they're considering now in Southwest Louisiana is predominantly about hydrology. And there's a hydrology study, I think, that's going to be done in the Calcasieu area. That'll be very, very important to kind of inform what some of the next steps need to be. I think for the first time, that area is talking about some structural solutions. And so, let's let the data, again, inform what we need to do to protect and to better support, the coast in Southwest Louisiana. And another way to do that, and I've advocated for this quite a bit over the years, is to have more monitoring stations. It does need to be about the data, and in many cases, we don't have enough monitoring stations where we're really monitoring the subsidence. We're making some very large approximations over very large geographic areas, and we know Mother Nature is building land on her own in some cases, and we're losing land on her own in other areas, not because of anything that we've done strategically through our master plan. And so I think data is going to be very important, and so I would support all of those things for Southwest Louisiana.
I think the question is asking for the single most challenging issue facing Southwest Louisiana. Given where they've been over the last several years that I've witnessed, I think that challenge is going to be responding to another unexpected natural disaster in a way that does not stunt their growth and opportunity to recover because of the compounding nature of what that looks like. And it's going to affect their infrastructure, whether it's the built infrastructure or the natural infrastructure. When you talk about water quality, when you talk about building roads and bridges, and you talk about what's going to attract people and businesses to stay there. When you think about the billions of dollars that have been invested in Southwest Louisiana in the LNG space, and to continue to have some of these risks and exposures are going to be critical. You're going to need a governor who's going to prioritize what's happening in Southwest Louisiana and work with the Corps of Engineers to ensure that we have the dredging on the GIWW as well as in the Calcasieu channels. You're going to have a governor who's going to have to build on the infrastructure success that we've had, like the $150 million I secured for the Calcasieu Bridge, like the $180 million widening I-10, and all of the other projects there. When you think about what the work that the legislature has appropriated funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law to help rebuild the water systems in communities like Lake Charles, it's going to be huge in terms of ensuring that the city and the community and the entire Southwest Louisiana region can be resilient for what matters, and those are the basic building blocks of a community. Do you have the public works and the infrastructure needed to sustain and continue to grow and encourage people to come back after the next disaster? Because we are a little behind the gun in preventing that from a climate perspective. It's important for us to figure out how to ensure that we can survive in that process and continue the fight. And I think Southwest Louisiana is positioned in an extremely good place to rebuild itself in a better, smarter, more resilient way. And that is what I will do as governor, is support that community, support those local plans, and support the basic building blocks of infrastructure that's needed so that next disaster can be overcome very easily.
So I'm the parent of 3 boys, and I bet many of you all have kids too, so a little cliff note. If you ever get asked which is your favorite child, don't answer it, okay? Because you're just gonna get in trouble. And so if you're asking I think it's the most important project for Southwest Louisiana, not answering it, okay? They're all important. But I will tell you, if you just look at it, the beauty of the program and the process, the science will drive that. Now, just as a innocent civilian who watches hurricanes come into the Gulf, I would say when you see a lot of the issues we have in Louisiana, it's wind sometimes. When it comes to water, it's how much can you diminish that surge when it comes in? Because the stronger that surge hits, the more it pushes water up into areas it shouldn't need to be. So I would say if you look at like Vermilion Bay and White Lake and those areas and some of the investments that are being made there to stop that surge and diminish it, that could help some of the inland impact you have. But again, let the science and the data drive that. The other thing I say is what's the most important challenge facing Southwest Louisiana? You know, if you haven't met Nick Hunter, you need to go meet him, the mayor of Lake Charles. I mean, that guy was elected pretty much shortly thereafter. He was hit after one biblical storm after another. I don't think he's had locusts in Blood Red Lake yet, but besides that, everything biblical's hit him so far. And I think they've done a heroic job in Lake Charles, fighting federal bureaucracies, bringing their people back. When you drive around there and talk to folks, they're excited again. We've got to make sure that we put the right investments in that area so we don't lose that excitement, because there's only so many times people can come back excited. And you can't have that burnout there on that piece. And I think that's very critical for that region to get that done. So I would say work with the locals there. The last piece I would say is I think Shawn's right, that investment you see in the LNG facility, that's a huge opportunity for the country to benefit from that. We have to make sure the protections are there. Also, a lot of that area is near some of the best duck hunting areas that we have in this state. If you've ever hunted down there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's the best mix of sportsman's paradise and working coast we have. So protecting that area, diminishing that surge, and being a great partner for the people in Lake Charles who are fighting to bring back their people, that's the biggest priorities, I think, for that region when it comes to this issue.
So when my kids ask me which one of us is their favorite, I tell them it's the one who listened to me last. And so that way it gives them some kind of incentive. I think that the biggest challenge is really hurricane recovery. I mean, I went after Hurricane Laura hit. One of my friends, Les Farnham, is the representative in Sulphur, and they just kind of said, hey, if anybody can help, we could use the help. So a whole bunch of us drove over there, and it was funny because we were driving through the neighborhoods, and they're like, can you help us move this carport? And it's like, how did this carport get there? And it's like, well, it's not our carport. We don't know whose it is. Can you help us pull it out and put it on the curb? So it was a devastating storm, and I rode out Katrina by myself in my house in Mandeville, and so I could tell you just Laura was just a mess. And I think that they're still recovering from that. I think lots of people have been lost there. I'll say, I think one of the best ways we can do that is kind of a platform of my campaign, I think, is just really empowering local governments to solve their own problems. When you look right across the border in Texas, things are really booming. And I think in Louisiana, the industrial sector in Lake Charles is booming. But I don't see those benefits really rolling over to kind of the population in general, and especially the development of the community. So I think as governor, one of the major things that I'd like to do is let local governments keep a lot of the money. So the benefits of having those industrial bases, I think, should really accrue to the communities there so they can be developed so that they can determine how to spend the money. And it's not something where they come to the governor and say, hey, the governor, we need your help to do all these things. It'd be better for that money to stay there, to be invested there, because while you're growing all these LNG facilities and chemical plants and everything, if that money stays in the local community, then you'll be able to rebuild, the hotels and everything else that's there so that there's really a life for people to come back to. And I think that's one of the most important things, the schools and everything else that really make up the culture and the important parts of the community. If you keep that money locally there and you don't have to go to Baton Rouge and beg for it, I think that's how you solve those problems. And if you look across the border into Texas, that's how they run it every day. And I think that's why it's so successful. And that's why a lot of those people got up and moved right across the border into Texas. So those are the things that I would focus on in governor, is really empowering those local communities to rebuild themselves.
So I grew up in Lake Charles. I live in Lake Charles and been practicing law there for over 41 years. You know, Hurricane Audrey came up the same pathway in 1957, and my father worked at the Port of Lake Charles for 50 years. And, you know, he was in the stevedoring business and the harbor docking business, and they brought 500 dead bodies and they put them in the sheds at the Port of Lake Charles, and my dad had to wear a gas mask. That's how bad the conditions were. We have done so much better with emergency preparedness today that we know. And so, yes, we had Rita come up the same pathway. Then we had Laura come up the same pathway. Then we had Delta. And yes, I had to make 2 claims on my house. I repaired the roof on my house after Laura, and it didn't have time to seat. It had to be done a second time after Delta. So I understand hurricanes and I understand Southwest Louisiana. I want to answer the insurance question that we moved off of a while ago. We can create legislation that requires, if you're going to write coverage in one parish, you write them in all. We got to stop insurance companies from cherry picking. So they did it after Hurricane Rita in zip codes. They wouldn't write in other zip codes. And it's amazing, one of the largest insurance companies in the world after Hurricane Rita wouldn't write. When I moved it from that zip code to the same zip code, they wouldn't write my house at another house. And so I had to switch to another company, and I had UPC, which has now left the state. They did pay my claims. But now the old company is writing coverage just like that. The big company, our good neighbor. I can tell you there's gamemanship that's being played in the industry. As the next governor, that won't be tolerated. So I'll get off of that. The answer to the question about Southwest Louisiana, the scientists answered better than me. Salinity in the marshes, the ship channel, we've got a lot of traffic, and the LNG is adding more traffic. So we have to build more levees because the salt water is killing the marsh. It's killing the estuary. It's killing the fisheries. It's killing all of the things that we've been blessed with in this culture in Southwest Louisiana. So thank you. That's the number one problem is saltwater intrusion.
Thank you for those 2 answers. So our final question, and we appreciate your patience and your details. Our final question is, as the world's oceans warm, sea level rise will become the main driver of coastal land loss, and hurricanes are projected to be more intense and more frequent. Private industry has begun to adopt policies and practices to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and industry has responded to state leadership like the Climate Action Plan's goal of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2035. As governor, how would you ensure that Louisiana is making the most of the economic opportunities from the global energy transition, while also avoiding the worst impacts of climate change?
Well, thank you for having us tonight, and thank you for this last question. As governor, I will always embrace science and operate with the consensus focus of different stakeholders. And I think the best way to captivate that or to capture that is to look at what we were able to do with the Climate Action Plan, to bring a diverse group of stakeholders together and adopt a plan that is meaningful for each of them to get value out of what we have put together. We've done the work to identify what the Climate Action Plan ought to be, focusing on hazard mitigation, sea level rise, land loss, wetlands loss, but we haven't been able to fund it completely, nor has every agency implemented what was assigned to them to do. We know what transportation's components were, and we put measures in place when I was secretary to deliver consistent with that. Every agency needs to do the same. As governor, I will hold all our cabinet officials accountable and lead and deploy a team of individuals to work to bring all of their resources to the table to achieve this, because when this is done right, all of Louisiana wins. There's no agency is void of the benefits of adopting and implementing this plan. I also support our maritime industry in terms of what we've been able to do, from dredging the Mississippi River to building ports, because I understand the value of what that means for our workforce and for the business community here in the state of Louisiana. We are positioned exceptionally well with our natural resources, our built resources, but more importantly, we've got people who are ready to get to work in this new energy market, whether it's wind, whether it's carbon sequestration, whether it's solar, you name it. We've got to diversify our energy portfolio, not just in terms of what we consume, but what we deliver. We know the large component of the market share that the oil industry and the gas industry has for the nation. We want to make sure that for all of these other elements, we have an equally important role to play for our country, but that's also going to benefit our people, our community, and our nation and our earth as well. And so as a secretary and as a future governor, this is the way you do with it. Adopt a plan. Plan your work and work your plan. And you've done that from a coastal perspective. We've done it from a climate perspective, and it's time to get to work.
You look around the world, the strongest and most effective environmental safeguards you can find are in America. If you look around the world's history and you say, where have the best innovation come over the last several decades on how to produce natural resources more effectively, have been in America, through American companies and enterprises and some of the universities we have. That's why I'm a strong believer on the more American energy you rely upon and the less you rely upon countries like China and other areas for energy, the better you're going to have on environmental performance. And if there's any proof on that, it would be if you look at who are the companies right now who are pushing the hardest right now to put their own investment dollars and their own horsepower and research and development into the next generation of clean energy development, whether it be batteries, whether it be carbon sequestration or whatever. It's the traditional American energy companies. And maybe they're not American-based, but they're those that operate strongly in this nation. And so I think we need to promote more Louisiana energy, more American energy. That'll be the best way to improve environmental compliance and stop relying on countries who don't take it as seriously as we do. And Louisiana should be proud of that. There's a movement across the country where, quite frankly, if we're being honest, national environmental groups are coming down to Louisiana and saying, we're the problem. That Louisiana is the cause of all this angst. And it is the opposite that is true. Louisiana is the state in the nation that is producing the energy that the world depends upon. It's fueling this big room and all the air conditioning that we have, and it's doing it cleaner than anywhere else in the globe. And technologies like natural gas, sequestration, nuclear, hydro, wind, those are great next generation technologies, and they're all here in Louisiana and being developed to be expanded in Louisiana. So we are the laboratory for that, and we're proven on that. The last thing I would say is you have a tremendous investment in something like the Water Institute, modeled off of Del Torres. That is where we bring in academia and industry. We bring in grant dollars, and we find that next generation of energy. We find that next generation of production to make it even cleaner than ever before, because even though we think we know how to do it the cleanest right now, I guarantee you 10 years from now, if we put horsepower into it and use our institutions, we'll be even cleaner then than we are today. And that's the path to a cleaner climate.
I think climate change is pretty important to Louisiana because we're really on the front lines of it. I mean, I don't think anyone in the country or maybe even the world experiences it like we do. We're literally falling into the Gulf of Mexico, so, every inch makes a big difference to us. When I was a kid in Mandeville, I don't remember the lake coming out and flooding the town as much as it does now. Now it's like twice a year. I run into the Weather Channel guy down every time there's a hurricane in the Gulf. He comes over to Mandeville to take pictures along the seawall because all the waves are splashing over. So, I mean, you can see the impacts that we're having, and it's definitely becoming more frequent. We're getting terrible storms, and I think we are not going to change the entire world, but I think we can do our part to make it better. I think the climate plan, the climate action plan, that's something I would maintain as governor. I think we continue to push to reduce emissions to make it better. That doesn't mean we get rid of our energy. We don't stop producing energy in Louisiana. Norway doesn't stop producing energy just because they have solar panels. I think that at the end of the day, we really have to focus on how do we make Louisiana the future that we want to have. Because the oil and gas here is not going to last forever. But I think we can use those resources. We can save that money. We can invest it in the future. I think looking at how to diversify our economy is one of the most important things we can do. Using the money that we raise from oil and gas, instead of using it as a crutch on bad policies, which is really what we've done for a very long time, we can use it as a competitive advantage to really advance, build more research in our universities, train our workforce, do things like that I think will really prepare us for a future and the economy of the future that's not so dependent on a single industry or not dependent on the ideas that we've had in the past. And I think really, when you look at the future, when you look at how Louisiana is positioned, the fact that we have all this know-how, we've been able to be successful in the things that we've done, I think we can really leverage that to use it in the future, the energy markets of the future, to really advance our state so that we don't have to rely on things like the federal government to come and support us in the future. I think that's what we really have to focus on.
As the next governor of Louisiana, my concern is the economy of Louisiana. And so we have to go in the direction that we can create the jobs for Louisiana. I believe that the building of the ships that are going to do the wind energy, or, I mean, if there's tax credits involved in it, we go with it. I believe that we do the things, the biodiesel plant that Shell's spending $1 billion down in Convent for, we go with it. Do I believe that's the destiny of the state? Not necessarily. I agree that we are the energy state of the nation. There's more oil and gas under North America that will take care of this nation for 300 to 400 years, and people don't want to admit it, but a lot of it's right here. So the oil and gas energy level of Louisiana, we will fight to make sure it's at full capacity. But right now, we believe that we've got to access these available funds and create the economy to do what we do. We have to be good stewards of our environment. I'm a firm believer of that. You heard me talk about if you got a permit to put a canal through the marsh, you got to clean it up when you finish. I'm just about believing that we be good stewards, that we're going to have some environmental problems. We're going to have some more storms. We've got to be prepared for those storms, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'll enjoy. I mean, many of us are going to agree on this thing. We have got to have our oil and gas energy working, and the LNG is a great thing that's happening. We've got that industry happening, but it's about jobs. And but right now we've got to access. If we're going to store, if we're going to do carbon sequestration and store it, if we're going to store hydrogen, we need to store it. We have salt domes in Louisiana that can be utilized. We have the natural resources that nobody else in the nation has. So we take advantage of it. Why? So we can have people working. We can have people making good income. And our ports and our agriculture are two of the greatest economical drivers in Louisiana, and we've got to take care of that. That's why I'm not for the agriculture community to turn around and put solar panels on real estate when we got Bill Gates and Chinese government owning so much of our state now. So we've got to pay attention, and so I'm out of time, but thank you.
Well, thank you again very much for having us today. These are important issues, and it's been fun to get a chance to talk with you all about that. Having reliable and affordable energy is fundamental to our way of life. Just think about what it's like when you don't have it. It's something we tend to take for granted, but any of you who have been around after a hurricane, you know how fundamental energy is to everything, because all of a sudden you can't do anything, right? You can't flush your toilet, you can't turn on your lights, you can't use your phone. I mean, it is something that is just core to our way of life. So we have to make sure that for our citizens in Louisiana, we have affordable and reliable energy. Now, in the year 2050, 40% of the world's energy is going to be provided for by oil and gas, traditional fossil fuels. But as Stephen said, those traditional energy companies are exactly the ones that are leading the fight and leading the charge in wanting to look at other forms of energy. And that's very important. And so really, rather than talking about the energy transition, I like to talk about more energy diversification. Those companies are working to diversify their portfolios, and they want to control their greenhouse gas emissions, and I think that's a good thing. And so, yes, I think carbon capture is a tremendous opportunity for our state. Not only are we going to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but the top 20 projects announced in the state of Louisiana in the last 24 years in the last 2 years, all have a carbon capture component to them. They're $1 billion apiece. Companies very much want to invest in Louisiana in that area. In the legislature, I have been a leading proponent of hydrogen, and I have gotten funding for LSU and some of the other academic institutions to study some of the new research in the area of hydrogen so that we can lead in the area of hydrogen. I think we can do both. I think we can improve our record in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and still be a leader in energy.
So thank you very much. That concludes our questions. It essentially concludes our forum. We look forward to the primary on October 14th, and we know the race is early right now, but we hope to hear a lot more dialogue about these issues during the many months between now and the election. Thank you very much for spending your Friday night with us. We really appreciate your time. I want to thank CRCL Advocacy Director Tyler Bosworth for organizing this forum, and I want to thank all of you for sticking with us on a Friday night. These issues are important, and our time is valuable. Thank you very much.